Woman gives birth to a baby that can control fire. How is this even possible? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The gentle hum of machines in the hospital room was almost hypnotic. Emily, a 32-year-old woman with glowing optimism, lay on the delivery bed. This was her first child, and the 9 months leading up to this moment had been both magical and peculiar. From the start, her pregnancy had been unlike anything the doctors had seen. Emily's belly would sometimes radiate warmth, especially during moments of intense emotions, whether joy, frustration, or even fear. Dr. Laura Bennett, her obstetrician, had been monitoring her case closely. "Emily, you're doing great," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Nurses bustled around, preparing for the delivery. Emily's husband, Jack, stood at her side, holding her hand tightly. His eyes reflected a mixture of anticipation and worry. "Breathe, sweetheart. You've got this," he whispered. The contractions came fast and strong. The medical team had barely enough time to prepare. With one final push, Emily let out a cry of both pain and relief. The room fell silent for a moment, a pause so profound that it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the baby's first cry pierced the air. But something was different. The cry wasn't just loud, it was accompanied by a sudden burst of warmth that seemed to emanate from the newborn. The temperature in the room spiked briefly, causing beads of sweat to form on the foreheads of the nurses and doctors. Dr. Bennett carefully lifted the baby, her expression shifting from professional focus to astonished disbelief. The child's eyes glowed, not with the typical newborn haze, but with a fiery amber hue that seemed almost alive. And then, as if to confirm everyone's disbelief, tiny flickers of flame appeared around the baby's hands. What is happening?" Emily gasped, her strength momentarily forgotten as she tried to sit up. Jack's grip on her hand tightened. "Is he okay? What's wrong with him?" Jack's voice cracked, his protective instincts kicking in. Dr. Bennett, despite her shock, quickly regained composure. "Is healthy," she said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. She wrapped the baby in a heat-resistant blanket, one that the hospital coincidentally used for burn victims. The flames around the baby's hands subsided, but the warmth remained. Emily cradled her son, tears streaming down her face. "He's beautiful," she whispered. The baby's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a connection so deep that it took her breath away. She wasn't just holding her child, she was holding something extraordinary, something the world had never seen before. The days following the birth were a whirlwind. News of the fire baby, as some nurses had started calling him, spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members whispered in hallways, speculating about what they had witnessed. Some dismissed it as a medical anomaly, while others were convinced it was something supernatural. Emily and Jack decided to name their son Phoenix, inspired by the mythical bird that rises from ashes. It seemed fitting, given the circumstances. But with every passing day, it became clear that Phoenix was far from ordinary. At home, strange things began to happen. On his first night in the nursery, the baby monitor emitted crackling static, and when Emily rushed in to check, she found tiny scorch marks on the crib sheets. The temperature in his room was always a few degrees warmer than the rest of the house, no matter how high they set the air conditioning. Jack tried to rationalize everything. "Maybe it's some kind of rare condition. We'll see a specialist, figure this out," he said, though his tone betrayed his own doubts. Emily, however, had started to embrace the mystery. "Jack, what if this isn't something to fix? What if Phoenix is special?" Their conversations often ended in silence, both of them grappling with the enormity of their situation. They couldn't deny the bond they felt with Phoenix, but they also couldn't ignore the fear that lingered in the background. One evening, as Emily rocked Phoenix to sleep, a sudden storm rolled in. The wind howled outside, and rain lashed against the windows. The power flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. Emily's heart raced as she fumbled for her phone to use its flashlight. As she held Phoenix close, trying to soothe him, a faint glow illuminated the room. At first, Emily thought it was lightning, but then she realized the glow was coming from Phoenix himself. Tiny flames danced harmlessly around his hands, casting a warm light that pushed back the darkness. Jack burst into the room, a flashlight in hand. He froze when he saw the flames. What's happening?" he whispered. Before she could respond, the flames around Phoenix flared brighter, and suddenly, the lights in the house came back on. The power had been restored, not by the utility company, but by their infant son. Jack stared in disbelief. "He did that, didn't he?" Emily nodded, her eyes wide with both awe and a hint of fear. From that moment on, they knew their lives would never be the same. The days following the power outage were filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Emily and Jack tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible to ignore the growing list of strange events surrounding Phoenix. One morning, Emily sat in the nursery, feeding Phoenix while sunlight streamed through the window. She noticed that the plants in the room, which she'd forgotten to water for weeks, were thriving. Their leaves were vibrant, as if they were basking in an invisible energy radiating from Phoenix. It was subtle, but it was there, a life force that seemed to emanate from her son. Jack, on the other hand, was more practical in his approach. He spent hours researching online, combing through obscure forums and scientific articles. "There has to be some explanation," he muttered one night, his eyes glued to his laptop screen. "Maybe it's a mutation, or some kind of rare genetic anomaly." Emily leaned against the doorframe, holding a cup of tea. "Jack, we've been searching for answers, but maybe the answer is right in front of us. Phoenix isn't a mistake or a mutation, he's a miracle." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "I just don't want him to grow up being treated like a freak. The world can be cruel, Emily." She walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll protect him. We'll give him the love and support he needs to grow into whoever he's meant to be." As Phoenix grew, so did his powers. At 3 months old, he began to giggle, a sound that quickly became Emily's favorite in the world. But his laughter had an unintended side effect. Tiny sparks would fly from his hands whenever he was especially joyful. The sparks didn't cause any damage, but they were a constant reminder of how unique he was. One evening, Jack decided to test the limits of Phoenix's abilities. "I've been noticing a pattern," he said, setting up a small experiment in the backyard. He placed a candle on the patio table and brought Phoenix outside, cradling him in his arms. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, a mix of curiosity and concern in her voice. "I just want to see something," Jack replied. He lit the candle and held it a few feet away from Phoenix. The baby cooed, his amber eyes fixated on the flickering flame. As if drawn by an invisible force, the flame stretched toward Phoenix, elongating like a ribbon of fire. Emily gasped. "Jack, be careful." But Jack was mesmerized. "Look at him, Emily. He's not afraid of it. It's like he's communicating with it." As they watched, Phoenix reached out his tiny hand, and the flame leapt from the candlewick to his palm. Instead of burning him, the fire danced harmlessly around his fingers, as if it were a living thing responding to his touch. Emily stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Phoenix," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and awe. "What are you?" The next challenge was deciding how much to reveal to the outside world. Emily and Jack agreed to keep Phoenix's powers a secret for as long as possible. They wanted him to have a normal childhood, free from the scrutiny of scientists, the media, or anyone who might see him as a threat. But keeping such a secret wasn't easy. During a routine visit to the pediatrician, Phoenix's temperature read as abnormally high, over 104 degrees. The doctor, visibly concerned, suggested further tests, but Emily deflected. "He's always run a little warm," she lied, forcing a smile. "It's just how he is." The doctor frowned but didn't press the issue. Emily left the clinic feeling like a criminal, her heart heavy with the weight of the lie. She hated hiding the truth about her son, but she knew the world wasn't ready to accept him for who he was. One afternoon, Emily invited her friend Megan over for coffee. Megan was one of the few people Emily trusted completely. As they sat in the living room, chatting about everything from work to motherhood, Phoenix played on a blanket nearby. He was babbling happily, surrounded by his favorite toys. "He's such a happy baby," Megan said, smiling. "You're lucky." Mine cried non-stop for the first 6 months. Emily laughed nervously, glancing at Phoenix. Yeah, he's definitely one of a kind. As if on cue, Phoenix reached for a stuffed animal and accidentally knocked over a glass of water. Before Emily could react, the water evaporated in a sudden burst of heat, leaving the carpet dry. Megan froze, her eyes widening. What just happened? Emily's mind raced. Oh, I think the heater's been acting up. It must have blown warm air right as the water spilled. Megan looked skeptical but didn't push further. After she left, Emily slumped onto the couch, her heart pounding. That was too close, she muttered to herself. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed Phoenix's abilities. By the time Phoenix turned 6 months old, his powers had become impossible to ignore, even for the most unsuspecting observers. While Emily and Jack had done everything to shield him from the outside world, the baby's growing connection with fire was undeniable and unpredictable. It all came to a head one fateful afternoon during a neighborhood barbecue. Emily and Jack had reluctantly agreed to attend, hoping to avoid raising suspicions among their friends. They had debated for hours whether it was a good idea to bring Phoenix, but ultimately decided that keeping him hidden would only invite questions. The backyard was bustling with chatter and laughter, the smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs wafting through the air. Phoenix, strapped into his stroller, was unusually quiet, his amber eyes darting around as if he were processing everything at once. Emily stayed close to him, her body tense, while Jack tried to engage in small talk with the neighbors. "He's such a handsome boy," said Diane, one of their neighbors, peering into the stroller. "Look at those eyes. They're so unique." Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, he gets that from his dad." Jack caught her gaze from across the yard and gave her a subtle nod. It was their silent way of saying, "Stay calm. We've got this." But they didn't. The trouble began when one of the neighborhood kids, a rambunctious 8-year-old named Liam, decided to entertain himself by poking the embers in the fire pit with a stick. The adults were too busy chatting to notice, but Phoenix's attention was riveted. He stared at the flickering flames with an intensity Emily had never seen before. "Phoenix," she whispered, kneeling beside the stroller. "Look at mommy, okay? Not the fire." But it was too late. As Liam's stick dislodged a chunk of burning wood, a small ember floated into the air. Phoenix let out a delighted giggle, and in an instant, the ember burst into a dazzling plume of fire. It wasn't dangerous, more like a firework than a blaze, but it was enough to send everyone into a stunned silence. "What the—" Liam dropped the stick, stumbling backward. The adults turned toward the fire pit, their conversations halting mid-sentence. Emily's heart stopped. She grabbed Phoenix, cradling him protectively. "It's just a spark," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Probably some grease on the grill." Jack sprang into action, rushing to the fire pit and stomping out the ember with his shoe. "Yeah, these old fire pits can be unpredictable." "Sorry about that, folks." The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, but no one pressed the issue. The barbecue resumed, albeit with a more subdued atmosphere. Emily and Jack didn't stay long. As soon as it was polite, they made their excuses and left. Back at the house, the tension between Emily and Jack boiled over. "This is getting out of hand," Jack said, pacing the living room. "We can't keep taking him out like this. What if next time it's worse?" Emily sat on the couch, holding Phoenix, who was now fast asleep. "So what do you want to do, Jack? Keep him locked inside forever? Pretend he doesn't exist?" "I don't know," Jack snapped, then ran a hand through his hair. "But we can't ignore the fact that he's different. And it's not just us who know it anymore." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He's our son, Jack. He's not a monster. He's just a special—" Jack sighed, his anger deflating. He sat beside her, resting his head in his hands. "I know. I just want to protect him. Protect us." The next day, Jack decided it was time to seek outside help. He contacted an old friend, Dr. Allison Reed, a biophysicist who specialized in energy anomalies. They hadn't spoken in years, but Jack hoped she could provide some insight without asking too many questions. Dr. Reed agreed to meet them at her private lab. It was a sterile, high-tech facility filled with equipment Emily couldn't begin to understand. Phoenix, as usual, was calm and curious, his little hands reaching for the strange devices around him. Dr. Reed examined him carefully, taking non-invasive measurements and running a series of tests. She didn't say much during the process, which only heightened Emily's anxiety. After what felt like hours, she finally spoke. "Jack, Emily," she said, removing her gloves. "I've never seen anything like this. Your son's body emits an energy field unlike anything in the natural world. It's as if he's a living reactor, capable of generating and controlling heat at an extraordinary level." Emily's voice trembled. "What does that mean? Is he okay?" Dr. Reed hesitated. "Physically, he's perfectly healthy. But his abilities, whatever they are beyond anything science can explain. You need to be very careful. If the wrong people find out about him..." Jack nodded grimly. "We won't let that happen." As they drove home, the weight of Dr. Reed's words settled over them like a storm cloud. Emily stared out the window, her mind racing. She thought of all the things Phoenix would face as he grew older. The fear, the rejection, the possibility of being treated as an experiment rather than a person. When they arrived home, Emily turned to Jack. "We have to teach him, Jack. Teach him how to control his powers, how to hide them when he needs to." Jack frowned. "You make it sound so simple." "He's just a baby, Emily." "I know," she said softly, looking down at Phoenix, who was babbling happily in his car seat. "But he won't be a baby forever. And if we don't prepare him, who will?" Jack didn't have an answer. Jack spent the next several nights pacing the house, unable to sleep. He watched Phoenix as the baby slept peacefully in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling with soft, rhythmic breaths. How could someone so innocent hold such incredible, terrifying power? Emily had a point. They couldn't ignore it, nor could they suppress it. But where did they even begin? Jack's mind raced with a million what-ifs. What if Phoenix's powers became too strong to control? What if someone outside their circle discovered him? And what if he wasn't safe in their care? These thoughts consumed him, and no amount of logic could calm the storm raging in his head. Meanwhile, Emily threw herself into research. Every nap Phoenix took was an opportunity for her to scour the internet, reading articles about energy anomalies, unexplained phenomena, and even myths and legends about people with extraordinary abilities. Most of it was nonsense, conspiracy theories, and pseudoscience, but occasionally she stumbled upon a thread of information that seemed almost plausible. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, might have answers. One evening, as Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by books and a glowing laptop screen, Jack finally broke the silence. "Emily, we can't just Google our way through this," he said, rubbing his temples. "We need a plan. A real plan." Emily looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "I know that, Jack, but what other choice do we have? We can't exactly walk into a doctor's office and say, 'Hi, our baby can control fire. Do you have any advice?'" Jack sighed, collapsing onto the couch. "I know. I feel like we're in over our heads." Emily closed her laptop and crawled over to sit beside him. "We are," she admitted. "But we're his parents. If anyone's going to figure this out, it's us." Jack pulled her into a hug, resting his chin on her head. "We'll figure it out together." The next morning, Emily proposed an idea that caught Jack off guard. "What if we move?" she asked over breakfast, her tone tentative. "Move?" Jack frowned, pausing mid-bite. "Move where?" "Somewhere quiet. Remote. A place where we can focus on Phoenix without worrying about neighbors or barbecues or anyone seeing something they shouldn't." Jack put down his fork and considered her words. "You think isolating ourselves is the answer?" "I think it's a start," Emily replied. "At least until we understand more about what we're dealing with." Jack wasn't thrilled about the idea, but he couldn't deny that Emily had a point. Living in a suburban neighborhood with nosy neighbors and curious kids wasn't exactly ideal for raising a baby with uncontrollable fire powers. After a lengthy discussion, they decided to look for a small house in the countryside, far enough from prying eyes but close enough to civilization in case of emergencies. Within a month, they found a modest farmhouse surrounded by acres of forest. It was old but sturdy, with plenty of space for Phoenix to grow and explore. The previous owners had left behind a small garden, a weathered barn, and a chicken coop that had seen better days. Emily loved it instantly, and even Jack had to admit it felt like a fresh start. The move was exhausting but necessary. As they settled into their new home, they began to notice subtle changes in Phoenix. The wide open spaces seemed to calm him, and his fiery outbursts became less frequent. He giggled as Emily carried him through the garden, his tiny hands reaching for the sunlight filtering through the trees. Jack spent hours baby-proofing the house, ensuring there were no flammable materials within Phoenix's reach. One afternoon, as Emily was unpacking boxes in the living room, Phoenix crawled over to the fireplace and placed his hands on the cold, soot-covered stones. Emily froze, her heart racing. Before she could react, the empty fireplace roared to life, flames crackling and dancing as if summoned by an invisible force. But Phoenix didn't cry or panic. He laughed, clapping his hands in delight. Emily knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "Phoenix, sweetheart, you need to be careful. Fire isn't a toy." Phoenix looked up at her with wide, curious eyes, as if he understood her words but didn't fully grasp their meaning. The flames flickered and dimmed until they vanished, leaving behind only a faint trace of smoke. When Jack returned home that evening, Emily told him what had happened. "He's getting stronger," she said, her voice filled with equal parts awe and fear. "And he's starting to control it?" Jack nodded, his expression grim. "That's what worries me. What happens when he gets even stronger?" Emily placed a hand on his arm. "That's why we're here, Jack. To help him. To teach him." But teaching Phoenix was easier said than done. How do you explain the concept of self-control to a baby who could barely say his first words? Emily and Jack tried everything they could think of: gentle guidance, firm instructions, even silly games meant to distract him. But Phoenix's abilities were as unpredictable as they were powerful. One evening, after Phoenix had fallen asleep, Emily sat down with a notebook and began jotting down everything they'd observed about his powers. "It's almost like he's connected to his emotions," she mused aloud as Jack sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee. "When he's happy, the flames are bright and playful. When he's upset, they're wild and intense." Jack leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "So we need to teach him to stay calm, to control his emotions?" Emily nodded. "Exactly. But how do we do that with a toddler?" Jack chuckled despite himself. "I guess we start with the basics. Patience, routine, positive reinforcement." And so, they began their unconventional parenting journey. They created a daily routine filled with activities designed to keep Phoenix engaged and focused. They encouraged him to explore the outdoors, where his fiery outbursts posed less of a risk. They read him stories about bravery and self-control, hoping the messages would resonate with him in some small way. As the weeks turned into months, Phoenix's progress was slow but steady. He learned to light a single candle with a wave of his tiny hand and extinguish it with a puff of air. He giggled with delight when Jack built him a miniature bonfire in the backyard, carefully supervising as Phoenix experimented with controlling the flames. Emily marveled at his determination, her heart swelling with pride and hope. But their newfound sense of normalcy was short-lived. One crisp autumn morning, as Emily was hanging laundry on the clothesline, she noticed a car pulling into their long gravel driveway. It was an unmarked sedan, sleek and black, with tinted windows that concealed its occupants. Her stomach dropped as two men in suits stepped out, their expressions unreadable. "Jack," she called, her voice tinged with panic. "We have company." Jack emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He frowned when he saw the men, his instincts immediately on high alert. "Stay with Phoenix," he told Emily, his voice low. "I'll handle this." Emily nodded, scooping Phoenix into her arms and retreating into the house. She watched nervously from the window as Jack approached the men, his posture tense but composed. The men introduced themselves as representatives from a private research organization, their voices calm and professional. They claimed they were conducting a study on unique energy patterns in rural areas and had detected an anomaly near the property. Jack played dumb, insisting he had no idea what they were talking about. But the men weren't easily convinced. "We're not here to cause trouble," one of them said, his tone measured. "We just want to understand what we're dealing with. If there's anything unusual happening here, we can help." Jack forced a smile, his hands clenched into fists. "I appreciate the offer, but there's nothing unusual about my family. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have chores to do." The men exchanged a glance, then handed Jack a business card. "If you change your mind," the other one said, "you know where to find us." As the car disappeared down the driveway, Jack returned to the house, his jaw tight with anger. "They know something," he said, slamming the door behind him. "We have to be more careful." Emily held Phoenix close, her heart pounding. "What do we do now?" Jack's eyes hardened with resolve. Whatever it takes to protect him. As the days turned into weeks, the encounter with the mysterious men lingered heavily over Jack and Emily. They became hypervigilant, scanning their surroundings for anything unusual. Jack reinforced the locks on the doors and windows, while Emily installed cameras around the property. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Phoenix, however, remained blissfully unaware of the tension. He spent his days toddling around the garden, chasing butterflies, and giggling as his powers manifested in small, harmless ways. Emily and Jack continued their efforts to teach him control, but now their lessons carried an added sense of urgency. They needed to make sure Phoenix's abilities stayed under wraps, not just for his safety, but for theirs as well. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat on the porch with Phoenix in her lap. The cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves, and the air smelled of earth and pine. She watched as Phoenix extended a tiny finger toward a firefly, its glow reflecting in his wide, curious eyes. The firefly hovered closer, seemingly drawn to him, before darting away into the darkness. Emily smiled softly, marveling at how natural it all seemed to him. Phoenix didn't see his powers as a burden or a danger, just a part of who he was. She wished she could share his innocence, but the memory of the men in suits kept her grounded in the reality of their situation. Jack stepped out onto the porch, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to Emily and sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "He's happy here," Jack said after a moment, his voice low. "But for how long?" Emily looked down at Phoenix, who had fallen asleep in her arms. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we can't live in fear, Jack. We have to focus on what we can control." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And what happens if they come back? Or if someone else finds out? We can't keep him hidden forever." Emily placed a hand on his arm, her grip firm but reassuring. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, we take it one day at a time." But the bridge came sooner than they expected. It was a crisp, clear morning when the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the tranquility of their routine. Emily was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, while Jack was chopping wood out back. She peeked out the window and froze when she saw the same unmarked sedan pulling into the driveway. "Jack," she called, her voice tight with panic. "They're back." Jack dropped the axe and sprinted to the house, his heart pounding. "Take Phoenix upstairs and lock the door," he instructed, grabbing a wrench from the toolbox by the door. "I'll handle this." Emily hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes, but she nodded and scooped Phoenix into her arms. She hurried upstairs, locking herself and Phoenix in the bedroom. Her hands trembled as she rocked him back and forth, whispering soothing words to calm both him and herself. Jack stepped out onto the porch, the wrench hidden behind his back. The 2 men exited the car, their expressions calm but determined. "We're sorry to intrude," one of them began, his tone polite but firm. "But we need to talk." Jack's jaw tightened. "I told you before, there's nothing unusual here. You're wasting your time." The second man held up a device that emitted a faint, pulsing glow. "We're not so sure about that," he said. "Our readings indicate a significant energy source in the area. It's unlike anything we've ever seen." Jack's grip on the wrench tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about, but you're trespassing. Leave now or I'll call the police." The first man raised his hands in a placating gesture. "We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to understand. If you cooperate, we can help you." "I don't need your help," Jack snapped. Now get off my property. The men exchanged a glance, their calm facade faltering. Mr. Dawson, the second man said, his voice low, we know about your son. Jack's blood ran cold. You don't know anything, he said, his voice shaking with anger. The first man stepped forward, his expression earnest. We know he's special, extraordinary, and we know how dangerous that can be for him and for you. If you let us study him, we can ensure his safety. We can help him reach his full potential. Jack shook his head, taking a step back. He's just a baby, he said through gritted teeth. He doesn't need your experiments. He needs his parents. Before the men could respond, a sudden burst of heat radiated from the house. Jack turned to see flames licking at the upstairs window. Panic seized him as he realized what was happening. Emily, he shouted, dropping the wrench and sprinting into the house. Upstairs, Emily held Phoenix tightly as the flames danced around them. She had tried to calm him, but her own fear had only fueled his distress. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You're safe. Mommy's here. The flames grew brighter, hotter, until they seemed to engulf the entire room. But to Emily's astonishment, they didn't burn. The fire swirled around them like a protective barrier, keeping them safe from harm. Jack burst into the room, his eyes wide with fear. Emily, Phoenix, we're okay, Emily called, her voice shaking. It's injured. He's protecting us. Jack stared in awe as the flames began to subside, leaving the room untouched. Phoenix looked up at his parents, his golden eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He giggled, reaching for Jack with outstretched arms. Jack scooped him up, holding him close. You're incredible, kiddo, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Downstairs, the two men stood on the porch, their faces pale. They had seen the flames and felt the heat, but they hadn't dared to approach. Jack carried Phoenix down the stairs, Emily close behind. He stepped out onto the porch and glared at the men. You want to know what you're dealing with? He said, his voice steady and commanding. You're dealing with a family, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect each other. The men exchanged a glance, their confidence shaken. Without another word, they climbed into their car and drove away, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Jack and Emily watched them go, their resolve stronger than ever. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. The weeks following the confrontation were filled with a tense kind of calm. Jack and Emily remained vigilant, knowing that the men might return. But amidst their heightened awareness, life continued. Phoenix's powers grew stronger by the day, and his laughter, bright and infectious, became a source of hope for his parents. Emily decided to reach out to an old friend, Dr. Clara Morrison, a retired physicist with a deep understanding of energy phenomena. Clara had always been a mentor to Emily, someone who could think outside the box. If anyone could help them understand Phoenix's abilities, it was her. Jack was hesitant at first. Are you sure we can trust her? He asked as they sat at the kitchen table one evening, Phoenix playing with his blocks nearby. What if she tells someone? She won't, Emily said firmly. Clara's like family. And besides, we need answers, Jack. We can't do this alone. Reluctantly, Jack agreed, and a few days later, Clara arrived. She was a sharp, silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She hugged Emily tightly before turning to Jack and Phoenix. And this must be the little miracle, Clara said, crouching down to Phoenix's level. Hello, sweetheart. Phoenix tilted his head, studying her intently. Then, to everyone's surprise, he reached out and touched her hand. A soft, golden glow emanated from his fingers, and Clara's eyes widened. Incredible, she murmured, standing up. You weren't kidding, Emily. It's extraordinary. Jack crossed his arms, still wary. We need to keep this quiet, he said. No labs, no tests, nothing that puts him at risk. Understood, Clara said. But I can help you understand what's happening. Phoenix isn't just generating heat or fire, he's manipulating energy on a fundamental level. It's as if he's attuned to the very fabric of the universe. Emily's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Is he dangerous? Clara shook her head. Not inherently, but his abilities are unique, and without guidance, they could become unpredictable. The key is helping him channel his powers in a controlled way. Over the next few weeks, Clara worked closely with the family. She developed exercises to help Phoenix focus his energy, turning his raw power into something more refined. Phoenix took to the lessons eagerly, his joyful nature making even the most complex tasks seem like a game. One afternoon, Clara set up a simple experiment in the backyard. She placed a small pile of stones on a table and handed Phoenix a shiny, metallic sphere. "Okay, sweetheart," she said gently. "I want you to focus on the stones and see if you can lift them." Phoenix's golden eyes glowed as he held the sphere tightly. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the stones began to tremble. One by one, they lifted into the air, hovering like tiny planets in orbit. Emily and Jack watched in awe, their fears momentarily forgotten. "You're doing it, buddy," Jack exclaimed, his voice filled with pride. Phoenix giggled, his concentration breaking. The stones dropped back onto the table, but the joy in his eyes was unmistakable. Clara smiled. "He's a natural." But their triumph was short-lived. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, the sound of helicopters shattered the peace. Jack's heart sank as he looked out the window. 3 black helicopters hovered above the property, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. "They're here," he whispered, his voice trembling. Emily grabbed Phoenix, holding him close. "What do we do?" Jack turned to Clara, desperation in his eyes. "Can you get him out of here?" Clara hesitated. "I don't know if I can." Before she could finish, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside. Shadows moved across the yard as a team of armed agents approached the house. "Stay inside," Jack said, his voice firm. He grabbed the shotgun from the closet and stepped onto the porch. "This is private property," he shouted. "Leave now or I'll call the police." One of the agents stepped forward, his face obscured by a helmet. "Mr. Dawson, we're here for your safety," he said, his voice cold and professional. "We know about the child. Surrender him and no one gets hurt." Jack's grip on the shotgun tightened. "You'll have to go through me." Inside, Clara pulled Emily and Phoenix into the basement. "We need to keep him calm," she whispered. "If he panics, his powers could spiral out of control." Phoenix clung to Emily, his little body trembling. "Mama," he whimpered, his golden eyes flickering with fear. "It's okay, baby," Emily said, stroking his hair. "We're safe down here." But they weren't. A loud crash echoed from upstairs as the agents forced their way in. Emily's heart raced as she heard Jack shouting, followed by the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Clara looked around the basement, her mind racing. "There's a storm drain behind the house," she said. "We can use it to escape." Emily hesitated. "What about Jack?" "He'll hold them off," Clara said firmly. "But we have to go now." With Clara's help, Emily climbed out of the basement window, Phoenix in her arms. They ran through the dark woods, the sound of helicopters and shouts fading behind them. When they reached the storm drain, Clara helped Emily crawl inside. The space was cramped and damp, but it was their only option. They moved as quickly as they could, the cold air biting at their skin. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged on the other side, near a quiet country road. Clara flagged down a passing truck, and the driver, a kind older man, agreed to take them to safety. As they drove away, Emily looked down at Phoenix, who had fallen asleep in her arms. She kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her face. "We'll protect you, baby," she whispered. "No matter what." Clara placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression grim but determined. "We'll figure this out, Emily. Together." The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would do whatever it took to keep Phoenix safe. The truck rumbled along the quiet road, its headlights piercing the darkness. Emily clung to Phoenix, her heart pounding as the reality of their escape set in. Clara sat beside her, silent but alert, her sharp mind already calculating their next move. The driver, a kind man named Walter, glanced at them in the rearview mirror. "You folks look like you've been through a war," Walter said gently. "I'll take you as far as my cabin up north. It's remote and safe." Emily nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you. We don't know what else to do." Walter gave a reassuring smile. You're doing what any parent would. You're protecting your boy. As the truck weaved through the countryside, Clara used the time to contact a trusted friend, a former government operative named Victor. If anyone could provide insight into who was after Phoenix, it was him. By the time they reached Walter's cabin, the sun was rising, casting a golden light over the dense forest. The cabin was small but cozy, tucked away in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Walter helped them unload and showed them inside. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "I'll head into town for supplies later. No one will bother you here." Once inside, Emily laid Phoenix down on a makeshift bed. He stirred slightly but remained asleep, his small body still radiating warmth. Clara set up her equipment, a collection of portable devices designed to measure energy fields. "Victor's on his way," Clara said. "He's bringing resources and he might have answers." Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. "I don't understand why this is happening. Why can't they just leave us alone?" Clara sighed. "Because Phoenix represents something they don't understand, and what they don't understand, they fear. But we won't let them take him." Hours passed, and tension hung heavy in the air. When Victor arrived, his presence was commanding. A tall man with a weathered face, he exuded an air of quiet authority. He greeted Clara with a nod before turning to Emily. "Mrs. Dawson, I've been briefed on your situation," he said. "First, I need to assure you that I'm here to help, not to exploit. Clara and I go way back, and I trust her judgment." Emily nodded, her voice steady despite her fear. "What do you know about them? The ones after us?" Victor's expression darkened. "They're part of a covert division within the government, specializing in anomalous phenomena. Phoenix's abilities put him on their radar, and they won't stop until they have him." Clara stepped forward. "But why? What do they want from him?" Victor sighed. "They see him as a resource, something they can study and weaponize. To them, he's not a child, he's a potential asset. But I have connections, people who can help you disappear." Emily's heart sank. "Disappear? You mean we can never go back?" Victor hesitated. "I know it's not what you want to hear, but it's the safest option. Until we can neutralize the threat, you'll need to stay off the grid." Jack's absence weighed heavily on Emily. She couldn't shake the image of him standing on the porch, defiant in the face of danger. "What about my husband?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We left him behind." Victor placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do everything we can to find him." The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. Victor worked tirelessly, creating new identities for Emily, Jack, and Phoenix. Clara continued to study Phoenix's abilities, teaching him to control his energy in ways that would keep them safe. Phoenix, for his part, adapted remarkably well. His powers seemed to respond to his emotions, and Clara's exercises helped him channel his energy more effectively. One afternoon, as he played outside, he created a small, controlled flame in his hand, laughing as it danced like a tiny fire spirit. "You're amazing, buddy," Emily said, her voice filled with awe. Phoenix beamed. "Mama, fire happy." His innocence was a stark contrast to the dangers surrounding them, and it strengthened Emily's resolve. She would do whatever it took to protect her son. Then one night the peace was shattered. Walter burst into the cabin, his face pale. "They're coming," he said. "Helicopters in the distance. You don't have much time." Victor sprang into action. "Clara, get the equipment. Emily, take Phoenix and follow me." The group moved quickly, gathering what they could and heading into the forest. The sound of helicopters grew louder, their searchlights cutting through the trees. Emily clutched Phoenix tightly, her heart racing. "Stay calm," Victor said. "We'll lose them in the woods." But the agents were relentless. As the group wove through the forest, they heard shouts and the crackle of radios. Emily stumbled, but Victor caught her arm, pulling her forward. "We're almost there," he said, guiding them toward a hidden bunker built into the hillside. As they reached the entrance, Phoenix turned back, his golden eyes glowing. "Aren't you, Badman?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. "It's okay, baby. We're safe now." But Phoenix's powers surged. A wall of fire erupted behind them, cutting off the agent's pursuit. The flames burned brightly but didn't spread, as if they were responding to Phoenix's will. Victor stared in awe. He did that? Clara nodded, her voice filled with pride. He's stronger than we realized. Once inside the bunker, the group caught their breath. Phoenix sat on Emily's lap, his small hand resting on hers. "Mama's safe," he said, his voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We're safe. For now." Victor closed the bunker door, sealing them inside. "This isn't over," he said. "But we'll be ready." Emily looked at her son, her heart filled with both fear and hope. Phoenix wasn't just a child with extraordinary abilities, he was a miracle. And she would protect him, no matter the cost.